El pueblo heroico de esta Nicaragua bendita y siempre libre expulsa a la nefasta organización de Estados americanos como nuestro general de hombres y mujeres libres, Augusto Nicolás Sandino, derrotó y expulsó a la marinería yankee de esta patria libre y soberana.
Nicaragua's leftist Sandinista government has expelled the Organization of American States, known by the acronym OAS. What is the OAS? This is a group that includes many countries in North and South and Central America, so all of the Americas, and it was created by the United States back in 1948 at the beginning of the First Cold War, and it was meant originally as a coalition of right-wing anti-communist governments that were aimed at waging the Cold War, right? This is actually a year right before NATO was created in 1949. So the OAS really has Cold War history, and it today portrays itself supposedly as an organization that supports democracy and human rights in the Americas. That's ridiculous. Some of its founding members included right-wing dictatorships, including Nicaragua's brutal, murderous right-wing family dictatorship of the Somoza dynasty, which was backed by the US. They were one of the founders of the OAS back in 1948. And since then, the OAS has portrayed itself as an organization that monitors elections to make sure that elections are democratic and all of this. The OAS is based in Washington. It receives the majority of its funding from the US government. And really, everyone knows that it is an arm of the US government. That is why Fidel Castro, the Cuban revolutionary leader, referred to the OAS infamously as the Yankee Ministry of the Colonies. He said, the US Ministry of the Colonies, the Yankee Ministry of the Colonies. Cuba was suspended from the OAS back in 1962, just 3 years after its revolution, against, again, a US-backed dictatorship of the right-wing dictatorship of Batista, that was allowed to be part of the OAS. So it shows the OAS has never been about democracy. In the past few years, the OAS has gotten much more critical coverage, especially because of its role in supporting the fascist-led violent coup in Bolivia in 2019. The OAS spread false claims of supposed electoral fraud that was justifying a violent coup against the democratically elected socialist president, Evo Morales, who's also the first and only ever indigenous president of the modern Bolivian state. So the Nicaraguan government, led by the leftist Sandinista Front, has expelled the OAS, has kicked it out of the country, and has withdrawn formally from the OAS. Venezuela did the same thing a few years ago. So now the three socialist governments in Latin America, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, are no longer part of the OAS, and we've seen other countries in Latin America increasingly criticize the OAS, including the left-wing, kind of center-left president of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, AMLO, has criticized the OAS. Even the centrist president of Argentina, Alberto Fernández, has also criticized the OAS. And of course, Bolivia, which is now once again governed by the leftist movement toward socialism party, the MAS party. They have also criticized the OAS because of their role in supporting the violent coup in their country. So the OAS is increasingly unpopular in Latin America and is increasingly in danger of being replaced, and hopefully it one day is replaced. And there's been discussions of replacing it with the CELAC, which is the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. This was created by Venezuela and Cuba, and specifically it was created by Venezuelan President Hugo Chavez as a way to replace the OAS, and it includes all of the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and it excludes the US and Canada, the colonial powers in the region. So the fact that Nicaragua expelled the OAS is very important. This is a historic step taken by the Sandinista government. And in this video today, I'm going to include later on, toward the end of the video, I'm going to include a translation of the speech given by Nicaragua's foreign minister, Denis Moncada, which was a powerful speech condemning the Organization of American States as the Ministry of the Colonies, as an arm of the US State Department. I'm going to translate some of his speech toward the end of this video. But I also want to talk about another very incredible thing that the Sandinista government did. And not only has the Sandinista government expelled the OAS, the Sandinista government also expropriated the office building that was used by the OAS in the capital, Managua. And the Nicaraguan government announced that the Institute of Culture is going to turn the former OAS building into a museum of shame, they call it. Museo de la Infamia, which is like museum of infamy, museum of shame. You could also say the museum of disgrace. And the vice president of Nicaragua, Rosario Murillo, announced that the Institute of Culture is going to turn it into the Museum of Shame. And she said that this is going to be a public museum. It's part of the public property belonging to the Nicaraguan government. And then she added, she said, what is more shameful, what is more disgraceful than the OAS? Here's an article I wrote at multipolarista.com. Nicaragua expropriates OAS building, will replace it with Museum of Shame, documenting imperialist crimes. And here you can see a recent event featuring, from the right to the left here, the Nicaraguan president, Daniel Ortega, vice president Rosario Murillo, the head of the National Assembly, Gustavo Porras, who's an important member of the Sandinista Front, and also the foreign minister, Denis Moncada. And behind them, you see the portrait of Sandino, Augusto Sandino, the revolutionary Nicaraguan who created a guerrilla army to expel the U.S. colonial occupiers in the 1920s and 30s. So this is a report I wrote, and I basically already discussed the main points, but this is another report I published at multipolarista.com. Nicaragua's Sandinista government expels OAS, calling it U.S. colonial instrument of coups and invasions. And here you can see this is the speech that was given in the foreign ministry of Nicaragua, and you can see here that in the middle is the foreign minister, Denis Moncada, and to his right, to our left, is Michael Campbell, who is an assistant foreign minister who helps run the foreign ministry. And I actually did an interview with him, you can find on YouTube, in which he talked about the decision to leave the OAS. He also talked about the importance of autonomy for the Caribbean coast, where his family is from, in Nicaragua, which is on the eastern Atlantic coast. This is part of the Caribbean coast, and there is a population, an Afro-Nicaraguan population that speaks English and is culturally different, and the Sandinistas have given them autonomy, political and cultural autonomy. And behind them, you can see this famous portrait, or rather this famous painting of this famous Nicaraguan known as Andrés Castro, who is fighting the U.S. colonialists from the mercenary army of U.S. colonialist William Walker, who invaded Nicaragua and tried to take it over. And this colonialist from the United States, William Walker, declared himself fake president of Nicaragua back in the 1800s. So if you can say he was kind of like the old version of Juan Guaido. But I just want to highlight a few quotes here from this speech, and then at the end of this video, I'm going to include the translation of Denis Moncada's speech. But the Nicaraguan government referred to the OAS as, quote, one of the U.S. State Department's political instruments of intervention and domination. And he declared that, quote, Nicaragua is not a colony of anyone. Therefore, it is not part of the ministry of the colonies. And there are other quotes here. He referred to the OAS as the deceitful agency of the State Department of Yankee imperialism. And as I said earlier, using the term Ministry of the Colonies is a reference to the famous language popularized by Fidel Castro, the Cuban president, and that's what he used to refer to the OAS. So we see here Nicaragua drawing on the revolutionary history of the region and its close ally, Cuba. This is an article I also published at Multipolarista back in November, when the Sandinista government announced that it was leaving the OAS, although it initiated a formal process of 2 years. It's this, in the OAS charter, it says that it takes 2 years for a country that wants to leave to formally leave. And Nicaragua, after announcing that in November, this April, they expedited the process and said that they formally left the OAS and they weren't going to wait the rest of the 2 years. And in this article, I talk more about the history of the OAS. I talk about, for instance, how the OAS orchestrated the 2019 coup in Bolivia against Evo Morales. It also legitimized the post-coup regime in Honduras after the US government backed a right-wing military coup against Honduras's elected left-wing president in 2009 under the Obama-Biden administration and the Hillary Clinton State Department. The OAS also rubber-stamped 2 different coups in Haiti, both against the same president, the left-wing president, Jean-Bertrand Aristide. You can see a pattern here. The OAS is always a right-wing instrument that is used against left-wing elected leaders in the region. The OAS also supported the soft coup against Brazil's Workers' Party in 2016 against the democratically elected President Dilma Rousseff. And of course, the OAS absurdly recognizes Juan Guaido as fake president of Venezuela, even though he has never won a single vote to be so-called president of Venezuela. It shows again that the OAS is the ministry of the colonies. I also talk about how in 1948, that one of the founding members was the brutal right-wing dictatorship of the family of Anastasio Somoza, the military general. And you can see him here with Richard Nixon, the US president in 1971. And of course, the Somoza regime was a puppet dictatorship backed by the US government. And it was the Sandinista revolution in 1979 that overthrew that brutal, murderous dictatorship. I mentioned that the US State Department boasted in an internal report, the budget justification report, the Congressional Budget Justification Report in 2018. And the State Department referred to the OAS, and they said that the Organization of American, this is an exact quote, the Organization of American States promotes U.S. political and economic interests in the Western Hemisphere by countering the influence of anti-U.S. countries such as Venezuela. So that is what the OAS does, and that is what the U.S. government rather refers to the OAS as, is it's in its internal documents. Here is a photo of, on the right, the notoriously corrupt coup-plotting leader, Secretary General of the OAS, Luis Almagro, who's extremely corrupt and a puppet of the United States. And here he is smiling and shaking hands with U.S. coup puppet Juan Guaido, the fake so-called president of Venezuela, who's never won a single vote to be so-called president. So with that said, now I'm going to conclude this video. I'm going to cut to some translations that I did with subtitles of some of the speech given by Nicaraguan Foreign Minister Denis Moncada, announcing that Nicaragua, with dignity, is leaving the Organization of American States, expelling the OAS from the country. And then later we discovered that Nicaragua it expropriated the OAS office building and is turning it into the Museum of Shame, a public state-owned museum where it will educate people on the history of imperialism against Nicaragua and Latin America. And if I can say so, that is the definition of based. But with that said, here is the translated speech of Nicaraguan Foreign Minister Denis Moncada.
Comunicamos que Nicaragua expulsa a la Organización de Estados Americanos. El pueblo y gobierno de Nicaragua hemos denunciado y continuamos denunciando la condición vergonzosa de uno de los instrumentos políticos de intervención y dominación del Departamento de Estado del Gobierno de los Estados Unidos, llamado equívoca y falazmente Organización de los Estados Americanos. El gobierno y pueblo de Nicaragua hemos desconocido y desconocemos este instrumento de administración colonial que no representa en ningún momento la unión soberana de nuestra América caribeña y que por el contrario es instrumento del imperialismo yanqui para violentar derechos e independencias, auspiciando y promoviendo intervenciones e invasiones, legitimando golpes de Estado en distintos formatos y modalidades. Ratificamos nuestra invariable decisión de abandonar la OEA, según lo expresado el día 19 de noviembre de 2021, y al confirmar nuestra denuncia y renuncia irrevocables ante esta calamitosa, truculenta y mentirosa dependencia del Departamento de Estado del imperialismo yanqui, no tendremos presencia en ninguna de las instancias de ese diabólico instrumento de la mal llamada OEA. Nicaragua no es colonia de nadie, por lo tanto no es parte de un ministerio de colonias. Al denunciar y renunciar a ese mecanismo infernal del cual nos retiramos inmediatamente en absoluta dignidad, ratificamos, eso sí, nuestro respeto, cariño y reconocimiento a Cuba y Venezuela heroicos y a los pueblos que valientemente libran sus luchas y que nos han acompañado y acompañan en las batallas que se han librado y se libran por la justicia, los derechos de los pueblos, la soberanía, la dignidad y la paz. El pueblo heroico de esta Nicaragua bendita y siempre libre expulsa a la nefasta Organización de Estados Americanos como nuestro general de hombres y mujeres libres, Augusto Nicolás Sandino, derrotó y expulsó a la marinería yanqui de esta patria libre y soberana.